I trained my replacement without knowing it. Then the CEO called her fresh talent to modernize the team. That night, my email was cut and I got $1,200 for 4 years of work. But they forgot to revoke one admin tool. So I watched silently as quarterly reports dropped, with every error traced back to her. And I had the changelog. The email bounced. That's how I knew something was off. I'd been trying to send a client update at 8:13 p.m. on a Thursday, routine stuff, when Outlook spat back an error saying my address didn't exist. At first, I thought it was an IT glitch. Then I checked Slack. Signed out. I tried logging into our project management dashboard. Access denied. Then my phone buzzed. A message from HR. Hi Ethan. As discussed earlier today, your position has been eliminated. Your final severance and benefits info have been sent to your home address. I hadn't discussed anything with them. The next morning, I sat in the parking lot outside my office in Palo Alto, staring through the glass at the same people I'd helped train for years. My badge didn't scan. Security told me, sorry man, you're not in the system anymore. And then it hit me, hard and slow like a bruise forming under my skin. The girl I'd spent the last 3 months mentoring, bright, ambitious, fresh out of college, had been sitting in on my client calls, shadowing my reports, even helping me automate tasks. She'd smiled through every session, asked a million questions, told me she admired how thorough I was. That morning, the CEO introduced her to the entire company on Slack. Meet Lauren, our new data operations lead. She's bringing a fresh perspective to modernize our analytics processes. That was my title. For years, late nights, missed holidays, I'd built that reporting infrastructure from scratch. I trained every intern, handled every error, cleaned every dataset. And now, a $1,200 severance and a deactivated email. But here's the part they didn't know. They'd removed my access to everything except one admin panel, the data automation scheduler that ran every single report for their top clients. It was a back-end tool I'd custom-built. Only I knew the quirks, the timing dependencies, and the fail-safes. And that's when I started to see the opportunity. I didn't plan to break anything. Not at first. But when the first quarterly reports came out, full of mismatched data, corrupted graphs, and duplicate invoices, it was easy to trace where the problem started. All signs pointed to Lauren. And me? I was the only one who could fix it. But before I tell you what I did next, you need to understand how I ended up in that position. How I trained my own replacement and smiled while she sharpened the knife. I joined Novatech Analytics in 2021, back when the company was still running out of a repurposed warehouse in Sunnyvale. Back then, it felt like a startup with a soul. There were 12 of us, and I was hired as the data operations specialist. A fancy title for the guy who makes sure nothing breaks overnight. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. I loved the puzzle of it all. Cleaning raw client data, automating systems, writing scripts to fix what humans kept breaking. Within a year, I became the unofficial firefighter for the entire analytics department. Everyone knew, if something went wrong, Ethan would figure it out. By the time Novatech landed its first Fortune 500 client, I was the one who built the infrastructure that made it possible. I created the pipelines, the automations, the error detection logs. My fingerprints were on every single report that left that building. The pay wasn't great, but I kept telling myself the loyalty would pay off. Stick around, my manager, Rick, would say. You're part of the core team. Once the next funding round closes, there'll be bonuses, maybe even stock options. So I stayed. In early 2024, Novatech got acquired by a bigger firm out of Seattle, Veridian Metrics. Overnight, the vibe shifted. The new leadership brought in consultants with buzzwords and meaningless PowerPoint slides. Suddenly, modernization became the word of the month. That's when Lauren showed up. Rick introduced her during a Monday meeting. Ethan, this is Lauren. She'll be shadowing you to learn our systems. She looked barely 24. Sharp eyes, eager smile, the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you've already been pre-approved for success. She said she was excited to modernize the workflow. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was curious, smart, quick to learn. She'd watch me debug scripts, jot down notes, ask, What's this function for? I'd explain, and she'd nod like she was absorbing everything. One afternoon, she said something that stuck with me. You've built such a solid foundation, Ethan. It's almost like this place couldn't run without you. It sounded like a compliment at the time. Now it feels like foreshadowing. Then came the subtle changes. Rick started forwarding me fewer emails. Lauren began joining client calls for training. I noticed she was given access to higher-level folders in our internal drives. Permissions I didn't even have until I'd been there for 2 years. I remember asking Rick about it. "Oh, she's just helping with documentation," he said, but something in his tone felt rehearsed. By June, the new executives began talking about lean restructuring. I didn't realize it then, but the clock had already started ticking. Lauren started taking credit for ideas I'd introduced months earlier. Things like adaptive scheduling and real-time reporting visualizations, stuff I had actually built. And when she presented them to management, she called them her modernization initiatives. I'd laugh it off, tell myself it didn't matter as long as the work was recognized. But soon, even that stopped happening. In late August, I was told to train Lauren on every part of the data flow pipeline, just in case. They framed it as cross-training for redundancy. I should have known better, because by the end of that quarter, she wasn't just shadowing me. She was replacing me. And when I finally realized it, it was already too late. By September, things at Novatech had gone from weird to full-blown suspicious. My gut told me I was being pushed out, but the problem was, I couldn't prove it. Every change seemed small enough to look harmless on its own, but together they built a pattern I couldn't ignore. First, Rick started excluding me from client review meetings. "Lauren's got it covered this week," he'd say. Then, suddenly, my projects started getting reassigned for better distribution. Even my desk was moved, literally, from the analytics bay to a smaller workstation near the break room, so Lauren can collaborate more closely with leadership. The message was clear. I was being benched. Then came the final insult, the performance improvement plan. I'd never missed a deadline, never botched a report, never had a single client complaint. But out of nowhere, I got a formal notice citing communication issues and failure to align with modernization goals. It felt like they were building a paper trail to justify what they'd already decided. The same week, I noticed something off in our internal dashboard logs. Lauren had started cloning my automations line by line. At first, she made small errors that caused delays, but when I pointed them out, Rick emailed me privately. "Let her figure things out, Ethan. We need her to take full ownership." That phrase, "take full ownership," it burned. I didn't realize then it was literal. The last straw came during a Friday all-hands. Rick stood in front of the team and said, "Thanks to Lauren's initiatives, our new reporting pipeline is now 40% faster." I felt like my lungs emptied. That pipeline was mine. She had just renamed my scripts, deleted the version tags, and handed it in like it was her own. After that, I stopped caring about impressing anyone. I started saving things quietly. Logs, code commits, screenshots, old emails. Proof that I'd built everything she was now taking credit for. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I'd need it. Around this time, I started noticing weird silences when I entered rooms. People avoided eye contact. A few of my coworkers I'd once been close with stopped looping me in on team chats. Even IT started acting distant. Then one afternoon, I overheard a conversation between Lauren and one of the HR coordinators in the kitchen. They didn't see me standing behind the partition. "HR, so the paperwork's all approved?" "Lauren, yeah," Rick said next week. "We just have to make sure the transition looks smooth." My stomach dropped. Transition. That night, I backed up everything I could. My work folders, my scripts, even credentials for our back-end systems. I knew it was risky, but I wasn't going to walk out with nothing after 4 years of carrying that company. The following Tuesday, my worst fear came true. The CEO called an emergency team meeting. Everyone was there, cameras on, forced smiles all around. Rick was grinning like an idiot. Then the CEO said it. "We're entering a new era here at Novatech. To lead our modernization strategy, Please welcome our new data operations lead, Lauren. The call went silent for a second. I remember my hands shaking, the room tilting slightly, my pulse pounding in my ears. Lauren smiled, the same polite smile she'd given me when I taught her how to build her first automation script. Rick avoided eye contact, and before the meeting ended, my access to the internal server was revoked. All except one tool, the old automation scheduler. The one everyone forgot existed because it wasn't connected to our main authentication system. That night, when I saw my email locked and the severance email hit my inbox, a pathetic $1,200 for 4 years, I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened the scheduler, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. The morning after my firing, I woke up before dawn, logged into the scheduler, and watched as the company's data processes started running automatically, just like they always did. Except this time, they weren't mine anymore. Every report, every script, every data pipeline I had built had been renamed. My author tags were replaced with L. Davis. My comments were deleted. Even my internal documentation, gone. It was like I'd never existed. That wasn't an accident. It was erasure. Still, the system was familiar. I designed it, and I noticed something strange. The timestamps on a few scripts didn't match the company's task sequence. Lauren had rearranged dependencies she didn't fully understand. She'd overridden fail-safes. I realized, if a single dataset uploaded late, the chain reaction would throw off every report that came after it. It was a digital house of cards. But here's where it got darker. That afternoon, a former coworker, Jenna, from QA, texted me from her personal number. "Hey, I heard what happened. I think you should know something." We met at a coffee shop in Mountain View. She looked nervous, kept glancing at the door like someone might follow her. Jenna told me that Rick and Lauren had been planning my removal for months, starting long before I was even asked to train her. Apparently, Viridian Metrics had set a directive after the merger to replace legacy staff with modern, marketable talent. Translation: they wanted younger, cheaper employees who could be presented as innovative leaders. And Rick had volunteered me as the first case study. Lauren wasn't just some random hire. She was the niece of one of Viridian's regional VPs. Her job was never to assist me. It was to replace me and make it look like a merit-based transition. The real gut punch? Jenna said she'd overheard Rick bragging to another manager that he'd finally gotten rid of the old guard, and that Ethan practically handed everything over on a silver platter. Then she showed me an internal memo that had circulated the week before I was fired. It was titled, "Modernization Case Study: Transitioning Senior Roles to Emerging Leaders." In it, Lauren was credited for rebuilding the automation framework from scratch. There was even a section thanking me for assisting in the documentation of legacy systems prior to migration. They'd rewritten my entire career into a footnote. I left that cafe with my hands shaking. I thought about all the times Rick had told me, "You're part of the family." All the late nights I'd stayed to fix bugs so the execs could show off perfect reports at investor meetings. They didn't just fire me, they humiliated me. But what they didn't realize, and what made me smile through the anger, was that the scheduler still ran under my original admin key. It wasn't part of Viridian's cloud infrastructure. It lived on an old server instance that only I had ever configured. That meant every modernized report Lauren and Rick were proudly presenting was still secretly running through my original logic, one that I could alter anytime I wanted. I didn't touch anything yet. I waited, watched, and when the next quarterly reports were due, the ones that went to Viridian's biggest investors, I noticed a few curious errors pop up in the output logs. Small things at first: date mismatches, swapped columns, duplicate entries. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to make someone look incompetent. Then came the bombshell. 3 days later, a LinkedIn post from Lauren went viral in our niche data analytics circle. She'd bragged about overhauling Novatech's data systems and achieving 100% reporting accuracy in Q4. But when the official investor packet went out that same week, every single report contained glaring data discrepancies, all traceable to L. Davis. Within 24 hours, The company's inboxes lit up with complaints from investors asking how a modernized system could make rookie-level errors. And that's when Rick's name appeared in my inbox again. Not from his company account, from his personal one. "Ethan, I don't know what's happening, but if you still have any old access, please reach out. We need to fix this ASAP." I stared at that message for a long time. They didn't know I'd already seen something far worse buried in their systems. Something that made me realize their betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. Because the data logs didn't just show system errors. They showed deliberate manipulation. By them, I didn't answer Rick's email right away. I wanted him to sweat. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control again. They had taken my title, my income, my professional identity, but they'd made one fatal mistake. They'd underestimated how much of Novatech still had my fingerprints on it. Before I did anything, I started watching. Quietly. The scheduler gave me indirect visibility into their entire data workflow, error logs, report runtimes, even usernames of who triggered manual overrides. That's how I found the manipulation. It started with a client named Halbert Financial, one of Veridian's biggest accounts. I noticed that a few of their quarterly numbers had been adjusted post-processing. The changes weren't random, they were deliberate inflation of client performance metrics. Someone inside the company had been falsifying analytics reports to make clients look more successful than they were. And every alteration was tagged under Lauren's credentials. At first, I thought she was sloppy, maybe trying to fix errors without understanding what she was doing. But when I dug into the version control logs, I saw something worse. The edits weren't manual. They were done through a script she didn't write, one originally authored by Rick. It hit me like a punch. They were doctoring analytics to impress investors. That's why Lauren's promotion had been so sudden. She wasn't just fresh talent. She was the face they needed, the clean, young, PR-safe name to front the data fraud Rick had been orchestrating for months. And I had proof. I made copies of everything, timestamp logs, version histories, metadata, and the old commit IDs linking back to their accounts. I encrypted them in a local drive under a simple title, insurance.zip. Then I started my revenge. I knew from experience that Novatech's quarterly reports were everything. They went to investors, partners, and press. If those reports were wrong, publicly wrong, it would devastate the company's credibility. So I built a mirror scheduler, a clone of the live system that would shadow the real one. Every time Lauren's scripts ran, my mirror would subtly alter non-critical fields. Small inconsistencies. Transaction dates shifted by 1 day, regional totals misaligned by 0.5%, category tags swapped. Individually harmless, collectively catastrophic. The system would look like it was working perfectly right up until the quarterly reports went live. But that wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel what I had felt, the humiliation, the panic, the slow realization that everything they'd built was collapsing under their own arrogance. So I went one step further. Using the mirrored environment, I planted an automated audit report. When the errors inevitably surfaced, it would automatically send a diagnostic file to Veridian's compliance department, the same one Rick had been dodging since the merger. All the embedded metadata pointed back to Rick's and Lauren's credentials. And because I'd left the admin key active under my name, technically, I'd still be the system's legacy author. It would look like the system itself was ratting them out. The beauty of it was that I didn't need to hack anything. I didn't alter external data or steal confidential info. I simply let their own corruption expose itself. Still, I wanted to see the moment it happened. So I reached out to Jenna again. She was nervous when she picked up. "Ethan, you can't mess with them," she whispered. "They're already panicking. Rick's been in meetings all week about the errors." "Good," I said. "Keep me updated." She hesitated. "Just be careful. They're saying the system's broken because you left it undocumented." That made me laugh. The same people who erased my work were now blaming me to save themselves. "Don't worry," I told her. "By the time this is over, no one will ever believe a word that comes out of Rick or Lauren's mouths again." What I didn't tell her was that I had something else. Something I'd found buried deep in the archived HR folders before my account was deleted. A file titled transitionplan_davis.pdf. It was dated 3 weeks before Lauren's first day. And inside it, I saw the real reason I'd been replaced. One that had nothing to do with modernization. It was something far colder. I opened the file at 2 a.m. in my apartment, the blue light from my laptop reflecting off an empty whiskey glass. My hands actually shook as I scrolled through the first few pages. The document wasn't a performance review or a merger memo. It was an internal correspondence between Rick, HR, and Viridian's regional VP, a man named Alan Davis. That last name hit me immediately. Davis. I scrolled back up. Lauren Davis. Alan's niece. But that wasn't the real gut punch. Halfway down the document, there was a section labeled Compliance Risk Mitigation, Data Ops Division. Under it, my name appeared 5 separate times alongside notes and red lines. One bullet point read, Employee Ethan M. shows extensive system access privileges. Risk of exposure if prior data inconsistencies become known. Another line, Recommend structured transition. Remove access by Q3. Retain positive PR framing, modernization effort, to minimize retaliation risk. In other words, I hadn't been replaced because I was outdated. I'd been cut out because I knew too much. That data fraud I'd found traces of, it had been going on long before Lauren ever joined. Rick and Alan had been using Novatech's reports to manipulate investor outcomes since the merger, inflating client metrics to make Viridian's acquisition look more profitable. And my infrastructure, my code, was what made it possible. They were using my automations to falsify growth. If regulators ever looked into it, my name would have been the one attached to every single transaction log. That's why they needed me gone. I sat back, staring at the PDF, reading and rereading that line. Minimize retaliation risk. They hadn't just stolen my job. They'd set me up as the fall guy for a corporate crime. Suddenly, all the small details made sense. The subtle warnings, the missing documentation, the deleted tags. Even the way HR handled my termination. Fast, impersonal, and vague. They weren't trying to erase me from the company. They were trying to erase the trail. The file went on to outline the transition execution plan. Step 1. Assign a new data lead, Lauren. Step 2. Migrate existing workflows to new infrastructure. Step 3. Secure original author's credentials, delayed due to IT transition. Step 4. Audit logs to ensure no data inconsistencies are traceable to pre-merger staff. But Step 4 had never been completed. That meant the old logs, the real ones, were still alive inside the archive. And I knew exactly how to pull them. I copied the entire PDF into my insurance folder, zipped it, and stored a backup in the cloud under a disguised name. Then I created a duplicate version, redacted just enough to send safely. That same night, I wrote a short email from a throwaway account to Viridian Compliance Audit at viridianmetrics.com. Subject, Data Integrity Breach, Novatech Division Body. You'll want to check the Q2 2024 reporting logs under Legacy Ops Scheduler. Metadata doesn't lie. A former employee, then I hit send. For the next 2 days, I didn't touch a thing. I just watched. By Friday morning, the effects started showing. The Novatech Slack channels, which I could still see through cached links, were in chaos. Someone had flagged irregularities in archived reports, and an internal audit had been launched. Jenna texted me around 10 a.m. Rick's losing it. Compliance pulled him and Lauren into a private meeting. People are saying the reports were faked. What did you do? I told her only, I gave the truth a push. That weekend, I started getting LinkedIn notifications, profile views from Viridian's compliance staff, legal associates, and even an outside consulting firm. It was all unraveling. But I wasn't finished yet. Because while Viridian's lawyers were chasing the fraud, they still didn't know one key thing. The source of the irregularities they'd uncovered, the very scripts that proved Rick and Lauren's guilt, were still running through my system. And the moment they tried to tamper with it, the final part of my revenge would trigger automatically. By Monday morning, the corporate storm had gone nuclear. Jenna texted me first thing. They've frozen half the department's accounts. Rick's locked in a conference room. Lauren's crying in HR. I didn't answer right away. I was already at my computer watching my mirror scheduler log every move they made. At 9:42 a.m., Someone from Veridian's IT department tried to disable the legacy automation server, the one still tied to my admin key. The second they did, the automated audit trigger I'd built quietly activated. It sent a compressed archive titled legacyops_audit bundle.zip straight to Veridian's compliance inbox, containing every trace of the data fraud, complete with timestamps, email metadata, and access histories linking back to Rick and Lauren. Then I sat back in my chair, closed my eyes, and waited. By noon, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Seattle area code. Mr. Martin? This is Dana Walsh from Veridian's Internal Audit Division. Her voice was polite but taut, the kind of tone you hear from someone who knows the truth but wants to hear you say it first. She asked about my role at Novatech, the automation scheduler, the Q2 and Q3 datasets. I told her everything, how I'd built the systems, how the access was handed off, how my documentation had been wiped right before I was terminated. Then I asked the question that had been eating at me since I found that PDF. Why did they really remove me? Was it just to cut costs? There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her take a breath. Mr. Martin, off the record, you were never supposed to see that file. But yes, the primary reason was risk containment. They knew your system logs could expose the performance inflation tied to the merger. Performance inflation, she said, like it was a normal business term. Rick and the VP, Alan Davis, had been falsifying growth numbers since the acquisition. She continued, your automation made their scheme scalable. You built a system that made fake success look real, and you didn't even know it. When legal started asking questions about anomalies in the client data, they panicked. Removing you was their way of deleting the evidence without triggering suspicion. I didn't say anything. I just listened as the reality sank in. They had turned me into a weapon, an invisible machine for laundering lies. My code, my logic, my precision, they'd twisted all of it to manipulate investors, inflate quarterly gains, and secure their bonuses. Alan Davis, the regional VP, was the real mastermind. Lauren's job wasn't just nepotism, it was insurance. She was his clean front, the innocent niece with a tech degree, the face that could never be accused of corporate fraud. If it all blew up, Rick would take the fall. She'd be a victim of bad mentorship, and Veridian would quietly bury the rest. I was supposed to be the ghost, the forgotten legacy tech guy who'd left behind a messy system they heroically fixed. But instead, the audit trail had flipped. When Dana hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at my screen. I'd spent 4 years trying to build something perfect, something airtight and foolproof. And in the end, that same perfection was what doomed them. Because my system didn't just run data, it preserved truth. Every falsified entry, every override, every shadow edit. They were all archived in triplicate by a hidden redundancy protocol I'd built after a crash years ago. A safeguard I'd forgotten even existed. Rick and Alan had literally engineered their own downfall by weaponizing the one thing they didn't understand: transparency. The horrifying part wasn't the fraud itself. It was that they'd planned it knowing someone, me, might get destroyed in the process. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a variable to eliminate. That was the part that broke me. Not the job, not the money, the realization that I'd been expendable by design. But now they were the ones exposed. And the best part? I hadn't even pulled the final trigger yet. Because once the compliance team finished their investigation, one more automated sequence was set to run. One that would ensure the entire company knew exactly who had orchestrated their downfall. The following Friday felt like Judgment Day. By noon, Novatech's internal chat channels were flooded with panicked messages that leaked to the press within hours. Someone had leaked the audit report. Every headline said the same thing: Veridian metrics under federal investigation for data falsification. VP and division lead accused of manipulating analytics to mislead investors. I didn't have to guess who leaked it. The moment Veridian's compliance team verified the falsified logs, my final automation triggered. A silent email went out from the scheduler's legacy server, addressed to all staff, Novatech division. The subject line was short: the truth is in the data. Inside was a read-only link to a public report containing the exact audit trail that tied Rick and Lauren's accounts to the fraudulent edits. Their emails, their timestamps, their modernization notes. Everything. It wasn't flashy. No dramatic explanation, no revenge speech. Just data, cold, objective, undeniable. By 2 p.m., the company's entire leadership chain was on lockdown. Rick's profile disappeared from LinkedIn within hours. Lauren's too. Word spread fast that Veridian had suspended Alan Davis and that the SEC had opened a preliminary inquiry. And me? I sat in my apartment, drinking cheap coffee, watching the world burn from a distance. Jenna texted me a screenshot from the company's internal bulletin. Effective immediately, Rick Tolland and Lauren Davis have been terminated for gross misconduct. An external investigation is ongoing. Veridian Metrics remains committed to transparency and integrity. She followed it with another message. Whatever you did, Ethan. It worked. I didn't reply. I spent the next week tying up loose ends. Deleted my mirror scheduler, wiped the access logs, and locked the insurance.zip file behind a long, complicated encryption key that only I knew. I didn't need it anymore. The truth had already done its job. A few weeks later, I got a certified letter from Veridian's HR department. It wasn't an apology. Companies like that don't do apologies. But it included a check for $14,600 and a corrected severance adjustment. Legal hush money. I cashed it without hesitation. Then I sent an anonymous package to a financial journalist who'd been following Veridian's case. A printed copy of the original transition plan _ Davis.pdf with a note that said, "They called it modernization. You should call it what it really was." 2 months later, the story broke wide. Alan Davis resigned for personal reasons. Rick was indicted on charges of securities fraud. Lauren disappeared from the industry entirely. Her name never came up again, not even in local news. As for Novatech, Veridian dissolved it quietly. The modernization program that replaced me ended up erasing them all. Sometimes I think back to that moment in the meeting, the CEO smiling, introducing Lauren as the new data ops lead. I remember how my stomach dropped, how small I felt. I thought I'd lost everything that day. But losing everything gave me the one thing I'd never had there: power. Real power doesn't come from titles or logins. It comes from truth. From knowing where every body is buried, and having the discipline to wait for the right moment to uncover them. In the end, all I did was let their own system speak. I just made sure it spoke loud enough. And the best part? The scheduler, my first system, my real one, still runs in the background of Veridian's forgotten servers. Every now and then, I log in just to see it hum quietly, alive and steady. My ghost in their machine. The company built my replacement, but I built her tombstone.